Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Erik Weihenmayer is an athlete, an author, an adventurer, and a motivational speaker. He's climbed the 7 summits, the 7 highest mountains on each continent, including Everest. He's climbed the stark, towering, nearly vertical face of El Capitan in Yosemite. And he's kayaked all 277 miles of the wild rapids through the Grand Canyon. Oh, did I mention he's blind? Erik lost his sight through a rare disease, juvenile retinosis, when he was just 14 years old. But that hasn't stopped him from creating a truly remarkable life, a life that is impacting millions of people through his not-for-profit No Barriers. No Barriers focuses on veterans, at-risk youth, people with disabilities, and caregivers. Their motto is, "What's within you is stronger than what's in your way." I think today's podcast will challenge and inspire you. Welcome, Erik Weihenmayer. Welcome to Bump in the Road. You've really changed the perception and possibilities for people. Could we go back to the time when you went blind? What was it like to have to adjust to that?
Yeah, I got diagnosed with this very rare eye disease called retinoschisis, probably at age 4, and that took a lot of doctor's visits, and eventually this one doctor out of Boston diagnosed it and said I'd be blind by an early teen, and there was no cure. So, honestly, the way I coped with it was just ignoring it, just going out and playing in the woods and trying to have fun with my friends. I wasn't allowed to do a lot of contact sports because if I got hit on the head, my retinas would detach more. So I was really kind of like the bubble boy in Seinfeld, although behind the scenes, I'd sneak around and water ski with my friends and jump out of trees into piles of leaves and do all the things that kids like to do, but I wasn't supposed to. And then I went blind about 2 weeks before my freshman year, like blind to the point where I couldn't take a step. I was at my grandmother's house in Florida, and I thought, how am I going to get home? And my family all were prepared for this. I was the only one unprepared. So my brother just let me grab onto his, like the shirt, the sleeve of his shirt, and just kind of tail him through the airport to get home. And I thought, okay, this is real. And I mean, I don't know how to describe it. I mean, I've tried to write about it and so forth. I mean, it's like a baseball bat to the side of the head, right? The kind of just shock and finality of it all. And so I was kind of a frustrated, angry kid for a long time. I grew up in Connecticut, and we'd have these raccoons that would come into our house. They'd break through our screen door and they'd eat our garbage, and you'd sometimes come across them and you'd see their like bright eyes, and they'd just be snarling at you from the corner. And I was basically that raccoon for a long time, just snarling at the world.
Man, that breaks your heart to even think of it. But I think anger is a really natural reaction for all of us when something like this happens.
Yeah, and it wasn't like, the kind of angry, just like yelling at people. It was more just withdrawing. I didn't want anybody to help me. I hated the way people perceived me. It was like you'd be walking through the hallway and kids wouldn't know how to react to you. I felt like like an egg that's like cracked in the middle of the hallway, and there's yolk spilling everywhere, and people are kind of just stepping around it. And going into the cafeteria, I remember, and I'm not trying to make the audience feel sorry for me or anything, but I mean, like I had a group of good friends that I'd play with when I could see, and I guess they were embarrassed, and they were embarrassed for me, just because they didn't know how to react, and I didn't know how to react, so I was probably sort of bitter and resentful. And so anyway, I remember the one kid at this table with a group of kids. He just said shh, and everyone was really quiet, like I wouldn't know they were there. And I heard him breathing, and I just said, "Screw you guys," and I walked on and sat at a table by myself. So there were a lot of like really big uh, changes for me at that point, where I felt really isolated, like there was this bridge between me and the rest of the world, and I did not know how to get back into the world. And that's what I was the most fearful of. I did not want to be this little Donnie Dark sitting on the sidelines listening to life go by. And I have by nature FOMO disease, fear of missing out, and I wanted to be right in the thick of all the food fights and fun and BB gun, wars and all the crazy stuff that kids did, and I couldn't stand the idea that I wouldn't be able to be a part of that.
How did you get back?
Mm, well, it's not like there's this perfectly neat formula like you'd have on a motivational poster. But I mean, I guess one thing that I did try to do, because hope was not killed in my heart, like I wanted to do things. So like whenever I get opportunities to do things, I would do them. Like I got a letter in Braille of a group taking blind kids on these recreational programs because blind kids would miss out on ball sports in PE class. And so this group would take a group of blind people every month out to horseback ride or sail or canoe or cross country ski. One time they took us rock climbing. We could talk all about that. I could talk about rock climbing for hours. And I loved it. It was such adventure for me, scanning my hands and feet, using them as my eyes and mapping out the rock just with the use of my hands and feet as my eyes and problem solving my way up the face. I was a very physical kid, and man, I loved it. It was everything I thought adventure was supposed to be, and all the things I thought I had lost as a blind person. I also wrestled too, and that was another really important thing to, I tapped my cane down the hallway towards the wrestling room. I'd heard blind people wrestled, and the team embraced me. My brother knew the captains of the team, so they were kind of expecting me. And man, they pounded my head right into the mat, just like every other greasy, pimply freshman. And that was my family for the next 4 years. I loved it. So I guess, how did I get myself out of it? Well, it was saying yes to opportunities and not shutting myself completely down. It was saying, life is still maybe good. And I just have to keep a little slice of my heart open to, what's out there.
Don't you think accomplishment also builds on itself?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like, I remember even that freshman year, that very first time I went to the wrestling mat, they lined up all the freshmen against this state champion. He was like 100 pounds, a little tiny guy, but he was an amazing wrestler. And the point was for him to humiliate every freshman in the line. So there were like 7 of us. And they dragged one kid out and slammed him into the mat and pinned him in like 5 seconds. And the next kid, 6 seconds, 4 seconds. It was like really hilarious. And then they dragged me out and threw me all around. I was like all over the mat, rolling around and pinned in like 9 seconds. And I was like thinking, even at that point, like, okay, I suck. I stink at this, just like all these other little pimply grease balls. But I suck 3 seconds better than every other freshman in the line. So yeah, of course. I mean, like, yeah, these small victories, these small summits that you got to sort of latch onto, because that's all you got.
I think that's very true for everybody in a lot of ways. How did you got involved with rock climbing in Phoenix, didn't you?
Yeah, well, after I went rock climbing up in New Hampshire with that first time with the Carroll Center for the Blind, it wasn't like rock climbing was that accessible to the average person back then. There weren't rock climbing gyms or anything like that. So I moved out to Arizona. That's a whole nother story. I got a job as a teacher at this really wonderful school called the Phoenix Country Day School. And I was a weekend warrior. And I joined the Arizona Mountaineering Club, and I I met some climbers, and as I said, we were total weekend warriors, just going out in the desert and rock climbing. Outside of Phoenix is rhyolite volcanic rock and limestone and granite and sandstone and all kinds of different kinds of geological rock, And I know this isn't a geology show, but yeah, it's a really amazing place to learn to rock climb. So I loved it there. I taught for 6 years.
That's really interesting. The different surfaces, is there one you prefer over another for any particular reason?
Well, yeah, because granite sometimes creates cracks, so you're jamming your hands and feet into cracks, and that's really cool for a blind person because you don't have to really search around for holds. Limestone is usually like kind of sometimes really coarse, but sometimes sort of slick like soap and has these little pockets that you jam a couple fingers into. So yeah, every kind of climbing has a very different kind of uh, surface and a different kind of style of climbing that you have to bring to the table.
Did a lot of this start to translate into mountains as you got into mountain climbing, or is that a totally different skill set?
No, climbing is really, I mean, yes, there's overlap, but they're almost like separate disciplines. So I did not gradually work my way into the big mountains. I was actually climbing a rock face outside. It was one of my favorite rock climbs. It was called Ride the Wild. It was really amazing, super fun climb. I got to the top of that. I actually led it, meaning I brought the rope up behind me. I was the leader. And my friend Sam was a substitute teacher at my school. And it was funny because he had attention deficit disorder. And he used to tell me that, like he had trouble in school, like listening in class, because most people can tune in and out the different radio stations in your mind and focus in on one radio station. Well, he'd hear 100 radio stations playing all at once, and it was so hard for him. And so we connected on challenge, the idea that we both had these challenges, and that is a great connection point, believe it or not. And so I was climbing Ride the Wild, and I got to the top and pulled Sam up, and he said, we should try something bigger. And I said, what, like another rock face? Like, a bigger rock face around here? And he goes, no, let's try Denali. And I was like, well, that's that's totally different.
That's a lot bigger.
That's not rock climbing in the desert. That's a gigantic 20,300 foot glaciated, freezing cold mountain in Alaska, and I hadn't camped out in the snow since being like a Boy Scout in 8th grade. So it was quite a leap into the big mountains.
But you were game to do it.
Well, I know I wouldn't make millions of dollars as a motivational speaker on the stage saying this, but one of my secrets to success is being impressionable. And and so Sam had this grand idea, because his mind is working like with these 100 radio stations all playing at once, and he's seeing Denali on one of those radio stations, and I wasn't seeing it, but I'm so impressionable. I'm like, wow, really? You think I can do that? Cool. And so, yeah, we started training, and a year and a half later, after 19 days, we summited Denali on Helen Keller's birthday. We didn't even know it until we got down.
Oh, that's really cool.
It was really cool. And by the way, we didn't summit one thing. We didn't summit one mountain before Denali. We failed on every mountain we tried until we got to Denali.
What came after Denali?
Well, I wanted my family to experience what the mountains were like. And so my wife, Ellie, or my girlfriend, Ellie, at the time, I wanted them to go over to Africa and climb Kilimanjaro. So I organized a trip to Kilimanjaro, and my wife, Ellie, and I got married at 13,000 feet on the Shira Plateau on Kilimanjaro. And then we summited the next day. I told her that was our honeymoon.
Did she like this honeymoon?
No, she said it was an endless nightmare. Yeah, but my dad and Ellen were there, and I made some really great friends. And actually, years later, got a letter from a guy named Douglas Sidialo, who's a blind guy in Kenya and Nairobi, and he had gone blind in the 1998 U.S. Embassy bombing in Nairobi. And he he wanted to climb Kilimanjaro as a way to promote peace prevailing over terrorism. And so I organized a trip around Douglas, and he charged to the summit, and he became the first blind African to reach the summit of Kilimanjaro. So I've gotten to go back to Kili a few times now.
It's really an interesting climb, I understand, in that you go through numerous different climate zones.
Yeah, you do. You go through you start in the jungle. They actually call it a montane forest, like a high altitude jungle. There's really big trees and it's just super beautiful, and it's raining in there. And then you pop up above the forest, and then you're in the like the savannah, like a savannah kind of feeling. And then you all the way up to the very top, which is like what they call an alpine zone, which is some snow and ice that's left at the very top of Kilimanjaro, but it's melting fast, as everyone knows.
Does a neophyte have to train for that ice zone on a mountain?
Kilimanjaro, I mean, it all depends. I mean, it could snow on you, and you might be tromping through snow. There might be, depending on conditions, the last, 30 minutes you might be walking through some old styrofoamy snow. But but sometimes people climb Kilimanjaro now and they don't even touch snow ever. They literally don't touch snow. The snow is on these kind of retreating glaciers around you, but you actually are on dirt most of the time. So that's how dramatically mountains have changed in the last 30 years.
How do you go from Kilimanjaro to Mount Everest?
Well, I actually had two trips to Aconcagua in the
Hmm.
middle there, which is the tallest peak in South America. I failed the first time with my friends. We had just total wind and horrible weather the whole time. And so I went back to Aconcagua a second time and reached the summit. And then I went to Mount Vincent, which is the tallest peak in Antarctica, with my friend Chris Morris. And we summited at Mount Vincent. It was like probably 40 below zero at the summit. And a little bit off color, I apologize, but I peed on the summit, and it was frozen before it hit the ground. And I was like, wow, there's my new definition of cold. Um,
That's
and
cold.
Yeah, it was very cold, but we were in down suits and, all this big mittens and moon boots, these one sport boots, and you can't have any skin exposed to the elements for more than 5 seconds, or your skin will just totally turn white. So it's all about like sort of clothing and temperature management when you get to extreme conditions like that. Um, but so I started climbing like peaks that were off the map, just peaks that nobody's really heard of. A lot of peaks in the Cascades and things like that. And, we'd have climbs where, you'd leave at, 2 in the morning, and you wouldn't get back down till the next night at 10 o'clock at night, and like these massively long endurance marathons. And I was climbing with one friend of mine who had actually attempted Everest twice without oxygen bottles, no supplemental oxygen. And he said, look, dude, you're better than 90% of the people who try Everest. He's like, a lot of the people that try Everest aren't real mountaineers. They're kind of just a little bit hobby part-time mountaineers, or people that want this really cool mountain on their resume. He goes, you've dedicated your life to this. And he's like, you have every right, every chance, to be there. You've sort of earned your right to at least give it a try. And, again, being the impressionable person I am, I said, okay, who am I going to listen to? These like naysayers who say I'm going to go up there and kill myself, or the people that actually know me and are judging me for, what they've seen me do and what they believe in. And, the other people are just judging me on what they think blindness is, like in their mind. That's sort of like categorizing and labeling and judging what they perceive blindness to be. And I said, okay, you got a choice. Who are you going to believe? Believe the people that know you. Don't, the people that are those naysayers, they don't know me. And I'll just choose who to listen to.
I think that's good advice for all of life. Did you have any special concerns about Everest versus another mountain?
Yeah, for sure. Because Everest was way higher altitude than anything I'd ever done. And the fear for me was that you go into what they call the death zone. I mean, there's sort of varying degrees to the death zone. Some people say it's above 18,000 feet. And what they mean is that like life can't really sustain itself above that altitude. So, like for instance, even at base camp on Everest, which is at like 17,500 feet, you'll you'll cut your finger and it will never heal. There's not enough oxygen in the air to heal that wound, so it just oozes for forever. And so you got to go down below before the cuts all heal up and you start to repair. So you're not really repairing up there, but the extreme death zone is above 26,000 feet. And I did know that it reduces your brain to this kind of reptilian brain, and I thought, okay, I rely on my brain so much more than other people because I can't see. So I'm trying to eke out information from what I'm feeling with my trekking poles or my ice axe and what I'm feeling under my feet and how steep is this terrain? Am I going to be able to turn around and get down from this? Like all these decisions that I'm constantly making and calculating in my brain, like if I lose that ability where I can't see and I can't think, that may be like this overwhelming combination. And as it turned out, I felt great. That was one of my strongest summits. I felt so strong. We got to the summit at 10 in the morning. We left at 9 o'clock at night, climbed through the dark. All my friends were complaining because they couldn't see. And came down and we're down about 3:30. And I remember sitting in the vestibule, that entrance of our tent, and with my crampons and harness still on, and saying, if anybody on our team, because we had 13 Westerners and 8 Sherpas, 21 in all, I said, if anyone on our team needs help, I'm going to go out and be there because I want to be a part of this team of where we committed to each other. We were like, I don't know, I don't want to brag, but like one of the last real teams on Everest, like where we actually trained together, we climbed other mountains together, we got together and practiced and prepared. We weren't like a collection of strangers who just came together on the mountain. And I think that was one of the secrets to the success of our team because usually like if 10% of your team summits, that's really great. Well, 19 out of 21 of our team reached the top. And I think it was because of the energy that we had as a team preparing and flailing and bleeding together.
I think part of success in general is balancing independence and interdependence. And you seem to really bring people together in teams awfully well.
Sometimes I think on Everest, we did a lot of things right. PV, our team leader, he had tried Everest once and then summited once. He was a big part of bringing the team together, like kind of picking the people on the team, people that had had some Himalayan experience, people who are good teammates, people who would really throw themselves into the work. And then I invited a lot of people on the team who knew me and knew how to help me and guide me. So it was this combination of Himalayan experience and then blind climbing experience. And that team really, really gelled. In fact, the people on that team have gone on to do great things. Luis Benitez went on to work for the governor. He's head of the outdoor recreation industry in the Colorado for a long time. Pasquale PV, our team leader, went on to raft the entire Blue Nile River, like thousands of miles from source to sea. Kevin, even our base camp manager, went on to guide blind people. I think he got like 10 blind people to the summit of Kilimanjaro and guided a guy without arms and legs who crabbed his way to the summit of Kilimanjaro. So my team have gone on to just do the most amazing things. And I think it's partly because all our lives were so transformed by the mountains and everyone sort of moved on with this sort of, I don't know, yearning to kind of see if they could use the mountains to elevate other people's lives. And so it's a really watching how, what the team did after the climb has just been really magical.
Well, Pasquale said to you, don't let Everest be the greatest thing you ever do.
Yeah.
How did you, I mean, how do you receive something like that?
It's one of those things that kind of grows on you. But I do remember coming down from the mountain, and you're crushed. I mean, you're like your legs are like rubber bands that had just been stretched way too many times. And as I said, like the elasticity is not coming back. You're just crushed, and your face is like a reptile. I remember I'd lost, I don't know, I came into the climb at like 176 pounds or something, 178 pounds, and I came and when I weighed myself when I got home I was 148 pounds. So you lose a ton of weight because you're burning like 10,000 calories a day at that altitude. So you're just crushed. And I got down through the ice fall the last time, which again is like a blind person's worst nightmare. It's this labyrinth of ice boulders and cornices and seracs just collapsing and exploding down the mountain. Tons of crevasses that you're weaving and bobbing through. And so I was just, you got to realize how thankful I am when I got down alive and safe. And then PV congratulates the team, and we're celebrating, and he pulls me aside and he says, Erik, he said, your life's about to change. And he said, do me a favor. He said, don't let this be the greatest thing you ever do. And I was like, PV, that is the worst timed motivational advice in the history of the world. Like, come on, dude. Like, I want to go home and rest for the next 50 years. And, you know, I'll be an old man looking back at what I did when I was 33 years old. And, you know, what PV was saying was, sure, adversity, challenge can be like a thing that shuts you down, but success can too, because, you know, those successes become a trophy on your shelf or a picture on your wall. And then that room becomes kind of a mausoleum where you look back and you go, look what I did that time. And it almost becomes a hindrance in your life. And he said, like, don't let that happen. Use this as energy or as a catalyst sort of to propel yourself towards new things, towards new areas of growth and, you know, ways of kind of connecting and elevating the world in some way. And it took me a while to kind of get what he was saying, but it was so right on.
What a wise man. His timing was bad, but what a wise man.
Yeah, wise man, bad timing, exactly.
A question I ask everybody. If you could rewrite your story, would you?
There's this line, there's this great movie back in the 80s called Spinal Tap, and they said to the guy, one of the rock stars, it's like a fictitious documentary, and they said, what would you be doing if you weren't a rock star? And he'd say, well, I'd work in a haberdashery, you know, like a clothing store in England. And I just cracked up, and I was like, you know, so I always think about that when I get that question. Like, if I wasn't blind, or if I could rewrite my story, I don't know. I mean, it's like I'd be taking on a new life, you know. Going blind, I'm not saying it was a great thing. You know, I see people that say, you know, going blind or losing my leg or whatever it was the greatest gift ever. And I'm like, no. I take my sight back. I'd love to see my kids, my daughter, my son. I'd love to see the mountains I've climbed. I'd love to look at people's faces and see them go from happy to sad to excited, you know, like I'd love that, but that's not my life. So I have to be a pragmatist. What I did was I let the sighted world go. Like, I killed it. Because I think that is maybe like a secret to growth, you know, or being able to move on in some way, killing the past, like stabbing it through the heart and saying, okay, that enables me to be free to move on to something new.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life. You can subscribe to our free podcast at www.bumpintheroad.us or become a premium member to hear the full conversation. Just go to www.bumpintheroad.us for more information and to sign up.